you see a model like Fable come out in the US, how long it will take for you to catch up on open source?
I think it's 6 months.
Wow, 6 months.
Within 6 months, there will be open sourcing models that will add the capability of Fable 5.
It looks like on the current benchmark, M3 is getting 47%, 5.2 is getting 63%. And so that's about a 30% gap with Fable getting 90%. So we can check back in 6 months. Okay, thanks so much for joining me today, Olive. Welcome to the bench.
Hi, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
What team are you on? And what do you work on at MiniMax?
I am mainly responsible for reinforcement learning. I was previously on the evaluation team, but then I kind of, broke the one big evaluation team to a couple of small ones, so I moved to reinforcement learning.
Got it. Yeah, I think the line between evaluations and reinforcement learning is actually pretty artificial than anything, because if you have the right evals, you can also optimize for those too. In the US, very easy to see these companies as vehicles of the people leading them. And so there's the very strong personalities, and Sam Altman at OpenAI, Daria Kropik, Zuckerberg and Elon, and people like that. But it's also very tough to get a sense of the Chinese companies and the different personalities behind them, as well as their different values. So I'm curious if you could share a little bit on what differentiates MiniMax, or the kind of values or personality behind it, and how that comes about in the models that you build.
Definitely. So, I think the difference Minimax is that let's say our goal is to improve the productivity in the digital world, right? So that includes not only intelligence, but also the various industries that we really want the model to be intelligent in. So it's not only about like math, physics, and stuff like that, but it's about, for example, coding, and for example, finance, for example, other industries. So it's accelerating the productivity of the society, and I think that's kind of the main goal. And so you can see in our latest models that we are really working towards that goal. Uh, not including like not only improving like the coding capabilities, but also we are working into some other areas of the digital world, for example, computer use, for example, finance and stuff like that. So yeah, I think basically we really want to accelerate the productivity.
Okay, got it. And I'm more just so curious, do you think that is largely similar to the goals of other companies like ZAI or Moonshot? Or do you think there's a unifying goal in that effort, or are there actually differences between these companies?
I think there could be a difference in how it's actually operated. Say that we really take feedback from developers and businesses that use our models, and we use that feedback into the model that we're building. So it's kind of it's really how you're operating, how you collaborate with other companies in this, like in the whole life cycle, that makes the model a little bit different, I think.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Well, I'm also curious, when you speak about building models that can take on many useful tasks in the economy, you talked about coding, but also finance and others. Do you find that in practice, there are meaningful trade-offs that you have to make in this optimization? Or do you find that the post-training approaches that you are building on, they result in strictly better models that are uniformly better everywhere?
So that really comes to if we train models on a lot of different tasks, if we need to compromise on capabilities while we post train the final model, right? There can be scenarios where like find the general model to be less capable in some particular area compared to the expert model. It is possible. Um, like with stronger models in general, like that kind of gap will close up. The expert model is the score is 80 and the general model is 60, but for the next version, the general look is 80.
Hmm. Okay, I see. So you think that these approaches will improve generality and result in better models across many domains? Is that fair to say?
Yes.
I think what's also interesting about the Minimax approach is that it seems like you've also developed your own host of applications um, that are pretty tightly coupled to the models themselves. And I think you see that in some other models as well, where the same company building them is actually also making the coding interface or the non-technical user's interface. And I'm curious if you think that we will see a coupling of the models and the harnesses over time, or you think that the harnesses will actually be fungible. It won't actually matter what scaffold exists around the models, and that anyone can replicate what's happening in the application.
I think there can be the best harness for a model. So say that our model is very general and you can put, for example, different skills around it, different tools around it, and it can absolutely follow the instructions, absolutely follow your skills and do stuff like that. But then there is a difference between better skills and not that good skills. And what I believe that is that models are built around the harnesses that is more suitable for itself so that it is actually better at the best thing, and if a company really builds the harness around it and the models together, um, like, I think it still will produce, like, more superior performance than, some other harnesses. I mean, like, the other harnesses, like, the model can perfectly follow and, work around them, but then it can be average performance as compared to the very professional one.
Okay, I see. Yeah, I think that kind of akin to how to humans work, right? Like you can have some people trained to use a TI-84 calculator, and although that there are other calculators which will perform the same functions, if they have to search for different buttons or workflow, only if they're slower. Um, they can perform the best. And so some well-designed calculator as very well-documented skills and workflows may mean that out of the box students and models actually like use it better. So there's probably some parallel there as well. Um, I'm also curious. I think it seems like models are continuing to get bigger, and so I'm curious if you have a view from the research team how priorities lie between pre-training versus post-training. Do you think that there's continuing scaling efforts happening in pre-training, or most of the efforts will focus on post-training?
Personally, I wouldn't say we have a focus. Both are very important and we put a lot of resources and effort in. We do believe in the scaling of pre-training, and we believe how the model is perfectly like need to be aligned during post-training. So I wouldn't say there is a particular focus.
Okay, got it. Makes sense. I'm also curious if you can talk a little bit about what the research culture is like. Things seem to be moving very, very quickly in China. I mean, this week we have the GLM 5.2 model, and just recently before that had M3. And so I'm curious what that looks like in practice for you all. Like, if you could paint us a picture on what research development process looks like. And I'm curious to know like how you keep up with what's going on and how that feeds into the experimentation process that you have within the lab.
We are very excited that, a lot of open source models are coming out very quickly. So that, that means the industry is moving so fast and it is actually progressing so fast and there's an absolute future ahead. And then I would say in terms of our research routine, in terms of keeping up with all the advances, would be that we do use AI to help we keep up. I think from very early on last year, we started using agents for like paper tracking and for like the new techniques that's coming out. So I would say like using AI would actually help us to keep up with the industry that's moving faster and faster.
I mean, what you're describing is to some extent a recursive self improvement process where models enable your research to be more efficient and make the next version of models more quickly and efficiently. I mean, do you see it? Is that a goal that the lab has to try and automate the research process itself, or is this just kind of like a side effect of building and using models?
I wouldn't say that's a very, that's like the mission of the company or stuff like that, whereas the mission of the team is not as strong as that. But personally, as someone working in the industry, I really want to automate my own work. It even happened like 2 years ago when I first joined the company. After a couple of months of work, I wanted to use like the model to automate my process. And then, but at the time, the models were very weak, but I still managed to like build, I wouldn't call it an agent, but it would be more of a workflow with all the prompts and scripts to kind of automate my work, and I called it my, AI colleague at the time. But gladly speaking, it wasn't as capable as my real intern, so my real intern, was still there. But yeah, I would say, like, as someone working in the industry, you automatically want to move faster, and you automatically want the process to be more efficient, and AI just seemed to be a very natural way of doing so. Since that it not only takes in, like, codes, right? It also takes in natural language.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think the comparison between AI functionality and entry level researchers or people in any job, like, is happening more often. I'm also curious to know, the MiniMax model is used, like, the US have an office within the US as well as in China. Is that right?
Yes.
So in the stated goal, we're trying to make the people in jobs more efficient and support different parts of the economy. Do you find that there are different optimizations or trade-offs you have to make between jobs and audiences in China versus in the US? Um, all of our benchmarks, for instance, are looking at legal, finance, or like English-driven tasks within the US. And so I'm curious if there might actually be a disconnect between the task distribution that you may optimize.
Yeah, it could be a problem. Say that for legal cases, the laws are very different in different countries, and if we want the model to be capable in many countries around the world, it could create a problem on the priority. But we do have very professional. For example, let's take finance as an example, right? So we have professional finance experts that have worked in the United States before and have worked in China before. So like we have different teams. They can use their prior knowledge on improving the model, which will come both ways. So I would say we do take both markets seriously.
Get it. On this point about using experts, are you finding that you're able to drive progress from using synthetic data, or are you largely reliant on expert and expert input to improve the model in these?
Personally, I don't work in that team. So from what I understand is that both data are very important. Just because with synthetic data, you can scale the tokens, and without expert data, you wouldn't know from like to which direction you are optimizing to. You got to use very professional evaluation and data to guide your model to be really useful in that field.
Are there particular benchmarks or evals that Minimax focus on? Or how do benchmarks drive the development of your models?
That is a great question. I think benchmarking is so hard that everyone is talking about it. We do look at many great open source benchmarks. So I feel like during the past year, there are a lot of great benchmarks coming out of the open source community on coding and on tool calling and stuff like that. But we find them not enough to actually reflect how it is used by the developers. So some benchmarks are synthetic, some benchmarks are handwritten, and some benchmarks are contaminated. So it is really key to be able to distinguish between them and to be able to pick out the one that you want to observe during your experiments. And that's the one like the first thing. But the second thing is that we really want to build benchmarks that reflects how user experience is on our model. For example, there are a lot of things that is not evaluated in current benchmarks, including like hallucinations and stuff like that. But they are actually very key into users' experience and trust on your model. Say that your model is outputting a file path that does not exist. It actually hurts the user's trust on your model and like the productivity moving forward. So I would say that open source benchmarks are great. We do look at them, but we also build our own benchmarks to reflect the user experiences.
Is there a benchmark that you wish existed that you think would showcase Minimax models in a way that people don't really appreciate?
I take it as two questions. The first one is there a benchmark that I hope it exists? Um, there are a lot of benchmarks I hope that exist. For example, let's just take multi-round user interactions with the coding agent. I don't see a lot of benchmarks really reflecting that capability, but it is key in how people are using model, right? And that is one. And the second question is there some showcase that I hope like or like some benchmarks that can showcase M3 in ways that people don't appreciate? I would say game development. I think we worked on game development, but we don't have a benchmark for that. So if somebody can try it out, and see how it's good or not, I think it's pretty good. Like Unity and stuff.
Right. Yeah, that's a good one. Unity is a pretty tough environment, and making a fun game is actually, I mean, it's pretty tough to measure, but I think would be interesting benchmark too. Yeah, the coding one, we call this 1 to 100. We have a benchmark called vibe code bench, seeing whether models can take a natural language spec sheet and build a full stack web application. So go from
Mm-hmm.
0 to 1. And I think you can expect to see more work in that space very soon. I'm also curious, you mentioned something about how when you look at open source benchmarks, there's a fear of contamination. And it seems like this is almost a necessary problem with having some benchmarks be open source. And so I'm curious, how do you think you can reconcile creating a large ecosystem of open source data sets and benchmarks while also having really high signal for model capabilities?
I think at the end, it really depends on how model labs are using the benchmarks and open source data, because they are open sourced. We can't like expect all labs to not train on them. Um, so I think in the end, it really depends on model labs.
That's fair. Yeah, I think it's some level of a trust exercise. There are things you can do with canary strings, or maybe by trying to pure input weights, can see if they had been trained on the. But even the sometimes the most well-intentioned actors can still accidentally train on the test sets.
Uh,
So I think there's some level of risk. You also, I'm curious, going back to this idea of what MiniMax is trying to build towards with these models. It sounds actually quite similar to OpenAI's definition of AGI, where they're looking to. I mean, they have an explicit purpose to try and automate the work of OpenAI itself, so that's a little bit different. But they also looked at a definition of AGI, which is the set of tasks and jobs within the economy. And so I'm curious if people within MiniMax talk in definitions of AGI and whether there would be a mind in that view, or there are other parts in an AGI definition that you think you're optimizing.
I think our mission is definitely intelligence with everyone. So that includes probably not only, high value industries. Of course, we do value high value industries a lot, um, like we mentioned before, right? But then we also want everyone to be able to feel the productivity to be able to benefit from AI. So we do also work on, for example, like role playing. People care about a lot, and we take modality very seriously. So you see, M3 is native multimodal, and those are things that we think everyone can really enjoy from. Right? It does not have to be software engineer. Does not have to be someone that works something like digital with a computer, but someone uses phones or someone actually communicates with people online can benefit from. So I think our goal is intelligence with everyone.
Okay, let's talk about the M3 model in particular. From your perspective, having worked on it, what do you think is the headline with this model, or what do you think is new that people should expect to see from it?
I would say Mm, the headline is, of course, first is native multimodal. So it has like it understands language, it produces language, and also it understands vision, right? And including images and videos. This is first, and the second one would be 1 million context. It is very long because we felt that like our previous context wasn't enough in a lot of long horizon cases with more powerful models. The context needs to be longer. And then also we worked a lot on like long horizon coding capabilities, including like kernel optimization, paper replication, stuff like that, so that it is like stronger intellectually in terms of coding. Um, yeah, and we also covered a lot of tasks, as I mentioned before, like finance, researching, game developing, and all of those. I think everyone can try it out.
Nice. Yeah, I was actually trying like the vibe coding interface that you have on the MiniMax website, and
Oh,
I've been playing a game called Othello. You're asked to rebuild Othello. It was very effective. Made a quick, nice GUI that I was trying. Um, I think I need to pose a harder task for it to build actually. Yeah. And then I think it's also interesting to see we've seen many minor releases. I think even within the last 6 months, we saw M2.1, 2.5, 2.7, and now M3. And
yes.
like we should overlay some graphs of model performance, but we see that it is improving very quickly. even in some ways outpacing some of the closed source alternatives. And so I'm curious if there are like further bets or investments you're looking to make in future models that will continue this rate of development, or you think that we'll largely see performance kind of approach the frontier of closed source models and then level off.
I would say my expectation is for it to keep up with the pace, but it actually requires a lot of things behind it, including, because we are expanding the scope of the tasks that the model is capable of. Say that we are adding vision understanding this time. So if we want to keep up with the pace in like all areas, that means more resources that are put in. So that is my expectation that the model will be like even accelerating the pace, you know. And but then in reality, it really depends on how the resources is allocated and how much resource we have because we are ambitious in terms of the range of the tasks that we want the model to be intelligent at.
Got it. And when you say resources, is the bottleneck compute or is it researchers or just time, maybe data? Like what is the bottleneck to seeing continued improvement on the pace you want?
I think all, but it is people. Because what we do realize is that AI is not that powerful to take over all of our jobs. It can help with our daily workflow a lot, but then when it actually accelerates and opens up more creativity and more opportunity and more research ideas you can work on, well, it creates even more spaces for people to jump in and work on it. So I would say currently the bottleneck would be people.
What does like the MiniMax researcher profile look like? Like who are the exceptional people that MiniMax hires for? What is the black door fighting them?
I don't think we have a very particular profile. We have people who have studied in the United States, in UK, in Singapore, and in China, right? And we have undergrad students, PhDs. We even have high schoolers. I would say just someone who is really passionate about the industry and very responsible and have good math and computer science understanding can join. Um, that's
Wow. I mean, sounds actually somewhat similar to startups in San Francisco in that there's pretty low ego. If people are capable, then they can find themselves working in very significant organizations. Actually,
Mhm.
one trend I'm not sure if you're following in Silicon Valley is that there are some startups claiming to be working 996, which to us is known as being a standard of work in some of these factories in China. Do researchers at MiniMax also follow 996, or do you have a more flexible schedule?
It is more flexible, but it uh it really depends on the researcher, him or herself, who like which schedule they want, right? Because we do have researchers who come to the company like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but works all the way till 3 o'clock in the morning. And we have researchers who comes like 6 o'clock in the morning and then leaves the company like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So it really depends on their own schedule and how they want to pursue their researching life. And also people are real like when you're waiting for the experiment result, sometimes you can't wait and you just want to open up your computer in the middle of the night to check the results and submit something new. So, I wouldn't say we have a very 996 schedule, but like for example, today is holiday and I'm in the company, just because I want to work on what I'm doing, but not because we have to do this.
Nice. Okay, yeah, it's a good sense. I think it's sometimes tough for people here to get a sense of what the working culture is, and in a place like China and Minimax,
Yeah.
but it makes sense to see how competitive all of these companies are, and kind of how neck and neck they are. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask what you thought of the GLM 5.2 release. It seems like the claims that the companies are making are pretty different. I mean, I think they're both 1 million context window models. GLM's leaning very heavily into coding and in particular long horizon coding. Minimax M3 is looking also in long horizon, but in particular has a focus on multimodality. I'm curious if there are any things that you were surprised by in that model or things that you will be pushed on for the next Minimax release.
I think they did a really great job with the model. But I think there are different things that the companies are pursuing for. For example, they are not multimodal, right? But we achieve multimodality because we do believe in native multimodality of, you know, now is vision and probably speech in the future. And we have our own video generation models, and like we have our so we are a company that has multimodalities, so that's what we are aiming for, like together in the future. So that's what I mentioned before, because we are kind of expanding the scope of the like model's intelligence. So like in the end it comes to like resources. Uh, but we do believe that in the future we are pursuing faster, just like what I said, right? That's the pace that we are anticipating. Yeah, but there is a priority into the definition of intelligence and how it's expanded.
I think there's also this view that over the last year, the gap between open source and closed source is really closing and closing quickly. And so I'm curious if you see a model uh, like Fable come out in the US, if you have an internal sense of how long it will take for you to catch up on open source, when there will be some open source model which can reach roughly the same performance as it, you think the order of a few months or a year, if you had to ballpark guess.
I think it's 6 months.
Wow, 6 months. Okay.
Within 6 months, that there will be open sourcing models that will um, at the capability of Fable 5.
And are there particular benchmarks that you would look to assert that claim?
Probably not the benchmark now. There will be greater benchmarks in the future, and how we well, people do have different ways to portray some model's capabilities, like different, like within different like capability ranges and zones. For example, 2 years ago we wouldn't use, well, we used the Sweet bench, but probably not the more longer horizon vibe coding benches that we are using right now. So I do believe there will be new benchmarks in the future, and also within six. Probably the new benchmarks won't come out like as long as 6 months. Probably it's like 3 months.
Well, I think maybe then Baikonur is a good one to look to.
Mm-hmm.
Baikonur was the first time that we saw, or Fable was the first time we saw a model get 90%.
What's one?
It's called Vibe Code Bench on our site. It's a held out benchmark of 50 tasks. It looks like on the current benchmark, M3 is getting 47%. We see that 5.2 is getting 63%. And so that's about a 30% gap with Fable getting 90%. So we can check back in 6 months, see if there's an open source model on this benchmark which gets close to 90%.
Yeah, I'm excited for that. But are you guys going to build a new bench since Fable is already 90% in this bench?
Yeah, 100%. In retrospect, now these tasks look quite simple. When we were building this benchmark, we were seeing models get around 10 and low teens percent. And then I think Opus 4.5 got 20%. We've seen about a steady 10 to 20% increase in subsequent model versions. Um, but the pace of development on open source side is actually even faster than those minor releases of Opus.
I think that's one of the cool things about doing evaluation, is that you can see all the different labs and all the different models, like how they are progressing and what their strategies are in terms of model improvement.
Exactly. I think you can see where, I think you can also see a more honest depiction of model performance because there's always a concern with some of these open source benchmarks like SweetBench that models have intentionally or not been trained on the test set. We even see with closed source models in the US that on SweetBench, the models have a tendency to perform some kind of reward hacking that might be trying to rewind the Git history and find the patch, or it might be using web search to download packages that have the solution. And so having held out test sets tries to control for that. Okay. I'm also curious if at all you spend any time thinking about inference optimization or serving the models. Maybe this is outside your scope, but it seems like by having open source models, there's a world in which people may take them and host them themselves. But MiniMax also seems to get a lot of value in users from people who are using the hosted API. And so do you think there's a differentiation to having the model hosted and interacted through the API versus something that people may use through other platforms?
I think it's important, like model inference is something actually is important even back when we designed the architecture. So probably for a model lab, it's not something that will only come out like when the model is published and when, it is served online. But then like during model architecture design, we need to think about inference optimization and what like was is theoretical like limit of things like that. But so I think for us it is a very crucial technique that we need to learn and we need to accumulate along the way, so that we can build better models for the community.
Okay, I'd like to switch to our rapid fire round. So these will be shorter questions, which quickly. First, I'm curious. You have a blog post somewhere where you've written that if a model comes out at midnight, you test it at midnight. And so I'm curious, what is your olive test? Do you have some sort of questions or tasks that you repeatedly go to see how a new model performs?
Yeah, I have, of course, open source benchmarks, and I have a set of my own tests that come from prior models where the models weren't capable of. I collected my own tests in my daily job, so I asked them.
Okay, maybe that's sensitive, but anything particularly interesting you think is discerning of model capabilities?
A typical question is to add a feature in the framework repo that I'm working in and stuff like that. Like adding the latest like the latest technique, for example. Yeah, I wouldn't say an example, but yes, something that people it's really hot around the area and people are discussing and add the feature in our data in our new framework and stuff like that.
Sometimes I try to ask models if they can solve the Collatz conjecture. It's an unsolved math problem, which is
Mm.
deceptively simple. And I also kind of use it as a litmus test to see whether models even attempt the problem or just immediately see it and decide to give up because it's not even worth the tokens to try. But so far has not been solved, so I've been disappointed. I'm curious if there's a next capability in the models that you are most excited to see developed.
In M3 or in general?
In general, maybe M4 or M5, but in the future.
Oh, that's a very hard question. I can't do it quick. Because there are a lot of capabilities. Oh, there are too much. Say that, for example, researching the models, like most models can't come up with very innovative solutions into unknown problems. That's something that I'm looking forward to seeing.
Is there a lab that you most respect outside of MiniMax? You admire their work?
OpenAI,
Fair. Okay. Is there a reason why? Why do you say OpenAI?
because they do have very good techniques and they have the imagination and they have the rigor.
Have you ever seen a fine-tuned version of a MiniMax model change how you build the next model?
Could you elaborate the question a bit? Like,
Curious if there are people who are playing around and fine-tuning MiniMax models in a way that makes you realize that they can actually do things that you didn't think were possible, or might impact things that you want to actually post-train or bake into the base model itself.
yes, I think so. There was some lab that I had some conversation with that were fine tuning on M2, and then they were doing it for legal cases and found the model to be actually good, like in terms of legal knowledges, and that's why, uh, we opened up the possibilities there in legal scenarios.
Okay, I might break the rapid fire. I have a larger question, which I'm curious to get your take on.
Okay.
Um, there are kind of two worldviews that are being discussed in San Francisco right now. A view of more general intelligence, where these larger and more capable models end up being used in more and more tasks and jobs throughout the economy. But then a different view, which is more around specific intelligence, that there is a desire to see smaller models used in cost optimized ways or different data distributions, which mean you should actually fine tune for those within a company or for a particular person. Um, I think Minimax could see an involvement in both worlds, where future versions of the M3 model are used in more and more places, or there's fine-tuned M3 models are actually deployed in very particular use cases. But do you have an intuition as to which world we're headed towards? That general models can be used out of the box in more places, or there'll be many more people post-training their models for their particular use?
As a researcher, what I pursue is the first one. I really want the model to be like larger and more intelligent and more powerful in like a lot of scenarios, and we cannot prevent model labs from doing so. So there is going to be at least one model that is capable of doing so. But personally, I am excited about smaller models being deployed, like more cost effectively, because that could be that could be helpful for personal users. But I think a model like that would be even smaller than M3 probably.
Okay, that's fair. That's a diplomatic take. Do you think that there's an upper bound on context window, or you'll see models and labs continue to try and increase model context window over time?
In 2024, we released a model called I think MiniMax Text 01 that had 10 million tokens of context window. So I don't see, yeah, we did long context a very long time ago. So personally, I don't see any scenarios longer than that now. But so I think that would be the upper bound I'm considering right now for another 1 year probably.
That being 1 million.
10 million. Yeah, the model was 10 million context lengths.
Did that model with 10 million context window have degradation within that window, which made its effective size smaller?
It had, but and the model was linear attention, and because we believed in long context, and that's why we pursued like hybrid attention architecture from the first place, like 2 years ago.
Okay, if you had to make a prediction a year from now, do you think there will be more labs making open source models or fewer labs making open source models?
Globally more,
Mm. And domestically within China?
probably the same.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think there are maybe a few factors that go into that. I'm curious how you form that prediction, but it's possible that the resources that you describe being limited may
Yeah,
actually force fewer people to keep up
right.
with what it takes to make capable open source models. And so some labs may actually just not be able to keep up with the frontier.
Mm-hmm.
And there also may be some view that over time, more people trend to closed source to have more value capture over the technology they spend so much time to create. But it seems interesting that you'd expect the number of Chinese open source labs to stay the same, but globally them to increase. Uh, is there a reason for that?
Intuition, I wouldn't say there's a very detailed analysis on that, but within a year, that's what I'm seeing.
Is there someone that you think that we should host for a conversation like this? You think might have uh, good takes on the space?
Should I just say the name out or um since it's called The Bench, right? The series is called The Bench. I talked to someone at Prime Intellect, I think a couple of months ago, and they really had some ideas on benchmarking.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. Then we can also host them in person on a physical bench in San Francisco. Um, do you think that the next version of the MiniMax model will see performance gains primarily driven by more parameters in the same architecture, or the same number of parameters, but in some kind of more efficient architecture
Um, More parameters.
as a effort in scaling loss?
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Olive. It was great to talk about the M3 model and some of the plans of MiniMax, and really looking forward to see new models that will come out soon.
Thanks for having me, Ryan.
Okay.